A woman experienced death and found herself in the depths of hell. Her journey through darkness and return with a shocking message will change your perspective on life and death. Watch until the end to discover it all. Kathy McDaniel was an ordinary woman who lived a full and vibrant life. Her friends described her as energetic, caring, and full of enthusiasm. She always sought to support those around her, found joy in simple things, and was a true pillar for her family and friends. Kathy believed in the power of love and faith, which were not just words for her but a part of her daily life. From a young age, Kathy was surrounded by the warmth of family and traditions. Her parents instilled in her a belief in God, and she carried these convictions throughout her life. She loved holidays, especially Christmas, which symbolized light, hope, and goodness for her. Every year, she eagerly decorated her home, prepared traditional dishes, and joyfully sang Christmas hymns with her family. These moments seemed unforgettable to her and always filled her soul with happiness. Work and responsibilities were never a burden for Kathy. She found meaning in helping others. She cherished moments that connected her to people, conversations over coffee, walks in the park, and even simple meetings with neighbors. Her smile and optimism drew people to her, making her life fulfilling and bright. Kathy never thought her life path could change dramatically. She considered herself healthy, strong, and resilient. Deep faith was her anchor. Kathy believed that God's love was always with her, no matter what happened. She often prayed, thanked God for everything she had, and found meaning in every detail of her life. But everything changed when illness entered her life. She recalled the day she first felt symptoms as an ordinary one. She was sure it was just mild discomfort that would pass in a few days. However, the flu quickly progressed into pneumonia. What began as a common cold soon turned into a life-threatening condition. Doctors diagnosed her with acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, a severe disruption of lung function. Her condition deteriorated at an alarming rate. Her friends and family were horrified when they learned how serious it was. The doctors explained that without an induced coma, Kathy had almost no chance of survival. She was placed in a medically induced sleep to give her body a chance to recover. At that moment, no one knew that while her body was fighting for life, her soul embarked on a journey that would forever change her perception of life, death, and the spiritual realm. When Kathy woke up, she immediately realized she was no longer in her body. Her first sensations were so shocking that it took her some time to understand where she was. Instead of the familiar world she knew, she was surrounded by absolute darkness. It was not just ordinary darkness but a dense, tangible void that seemed to crush her very existence. The sounds she heard amplified her fear even more. These were moans, screams, and strange, drawn-out whispers that seemed to pierce directly into her consciousness. They echoed both far away and nearby, filling all the space around her. In this terrifying cacophony, there was nothing human, only pain and despair. Kathy began to search for light, even the faintest hint of something familiar, but there was none. It seemed she had found herself in a place where time and space did not exist. Suddenly, a voice spoke. It echoed directly in her head yet seemed to come from everywhere. "Do you know where you are?" This question stunned her. She could not respond. A feeling washed over her that she was in a place from which there was no escape. But what was this place? Questions began racing through her mind. What had she done wrong? Why was she here? Gradually, Kathy realized that this was the place she had only heard about in legends and sacred texts. She was in hell. This realization made her heart clench with terror. She had always believed in God, lived by His commandments, and prayed. How could she end up here? The sense of isolation grew stronger. It was not just loneliness, it was a complete separation, as if she had been abandoned in an endless void where no one would ever find her. Every minute felt like an eternity, and she had no idea how long she had been there. Soon, she began to notice other figures. They were vague, shadowy forms, but she could feel their presence. These beings did not resemble humans. They radiated malice, fear, and oppressive dread. It seemed they were watching her, waiting for the right moment to approach. Kathy tried to pray, but even the words of prayer felt hollow. She sensed that her faith and strength of spirit were somehow blocked. Her heart was filled with fear, which grew more intense with each passing second. The hell she found herself in was not a place of fire and brimstone as she had once imagined. It was a realm of profound despair, where hope and love were absent. She felt as though no one could hear her there, that her prayers and cries would never reach any power capable of saving her. These first minutes in hell became the most intense trial Kathy had ever faced. It was an absolute descent into the abyss, where she had to confront herself, her fears, and her doubts. She thought she could not endure it any longer, but her story was just beginning. After the first moments of realizing she was in hell, Kathy felt the darkness around her begin to shift. It was no longer a motionless mass, it became a living, oppressive force that seemed intent on consuming her entirely. The space around her constantly changed, and with each change, she faced something even more terrifying. The first trial was her sense of helplessness. Kathy found herself on a desolate plain where the wind, filled with moans and screams, lashed against her face. It felt as if it were tearing her soul apart. Every second there felt like an eternity. She heard voices calling her, but they were filled with hatred and disdain. She tried to respond, but her words were swallowed up by the wind, leaving no trace. She began to notice other figures emerging from the plain. They were only partly human. Their faces were disfigured with pain, and their movements resembled attempts to escape unseen chains. They screamed, begging her for help, but Kathy knew she could do nothing. She was as powerless as they were. Each trial in this place was tied to her deepest fears and guilt, which she had carried within herself. At one point, she found herself in a small room entirely filled with mirrors. In each one, she saw her reflection, but the images were distorted. They showed moments from her life when she had made mistakes, when she had been unkind, even unintentionally. Each reflection accused her, mocked her, and reminded her of things she wished to forget. Kathy tried to turn away, but the mirrors surrounded her on all sides. This place forced her to confront her own fears and doubts. She began to question herself, was she truly a good person? Why had she never thought about the consequences her words or actions could have on others? Then, as if by some unseen force, she found herself on a bridge suspended over an abyss. The bridge was narrow and unstable, threatening to collapse with every step she took. Below the bridge was an infinite void that seemed to call to her. She felt something pulling her downward, as if her own fear had become a tangible force trying to drag her in. Kathy knew she had to keep moving, but with each step, the fear grew stronger. She heard whispers urging her to stop, to give up, to leap into the abyss. Her legs trembled, but she could not stop. She understood that if she gave in, she would never escape this place. The hardest trial came when she encountered figures from her past. She saw the faces of people she had loved, but now they accused her. These figures almost looked demonic, their voices filled with pain and reproach. They told her she hadn't loved enough, hadn't cared enough, that she had let them down. Kathy knew this might be an illusion, but the pain she felt was all too real. She realized that hell was not just a place of external torment. It was a world of her inner chaos, her fears, guilt, and regrets. It was her own mind turned against her, forcing her to relive the most painful moments of her life. She began to understand that in order to survive, she needed not just to fight these images but to accept them, acknowledge her mistakes, and forgive herself. These trials seemed to go on forever. Time in this place didn't exist, and every second felt like an eternity. Kathy was certain she would never escape, but even in her darkest moment, a faint spark of hope remained within her, a sense that this wasn't the end. She didn't yet understand where salvation would come from, but she felt she had to keep fighting. It seemed the trials of her soul would never end. Kathy was on the brink of complete despair when something unexpected happened. She found herself in a dark, oppressive shack. This place radiated hopelessness. The walls seemed to breathe, exuding cold, clammy air. The shack felt like a cage with no way out. Kathy sat on the floor, feeling her strength drain away. Her mind was overwhelmed with pain and fear. She was on the verge of surrendering when a melody suddenly surfaced in her memory. It was the hymn "Away in a Manger," a Christmas song she had sung many years ago when Christmas symbolized warmth, love, and light for her. In this cold and darkness, a strange thought came to her: what if she tried to sing? It seemed absurd, but she began. Her voice trembled, each word was a struggle, but she kept going. Away in a manger, no crib for a bed. At first, nothing happened. But then, something changed. The very air in the shack seemed to shift. Her voice grew stronger, and with it, the space around her began to fill with a strange yet comforting light. This light was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it gradually became brighter. The darkness receded. For the first time since arriving in this place, she felt warmth that brought with it a sense of hope. It seemed her singing had pierced through the veil of this grim realm. Then she heard voices. At first, there was one, then another. They were singing the same hymn, joining her words. It sounded like a choir filled with love and compassion. Kathy realized she was no longer alone. The light grew stronger, filling the shack. It was soft but so bright that she couldn't look away. Figures began to emerge from the light. These were not the dark, terrifying beings that had surrounded her earlier. These figures radiated warmth, kindness, and an incredible sense of peace. Kathy realized they were angels. Their faces were not distinct, but their presence was so powerful that she felt an overwhelming surge of love coursing through her soul. They didn't speak, but she could feel their messages. She understood that her suffering was not a punishment but a lesson. These trials had been given to her so she could confront and release her fears, guilt, and regrets. She was surrounded by the light, which felt like an embrace, healing every part of her being. At that moment, she felt she was finally free from the weight that had burdened her for so long. Her soul was filled with peace and gratitude. The angels made her understand that her time hadn't yet come. They told her she had a mission to fulfill on earth. This light was not just bright, it was alive. It reminded her of God's all-encompassing love, which had always been with her, even in her darkest moments. Kathy realized that light and darkness exist together, but love is always stronger. As the light filled the space entirely, she felt her consciousness returning to her body. The angels didn't say goodbye, but their presence stayed with her as something she would never forget. The light surrounding Kathy gradually began to fade, but not as something diminishing, rather, it was a gentle transition from one state to another. Her consciousness, previously immersed in the celestial realm, began to reconnect with her earthly existence. She felt her essence slowly merging back into her body. It was both strange and wondrous. Her body felt heavy, as if she was relearning how to inhabit it. The first thing she became aware of was the sensation of breathing. Air filled her lungs, and she realized she was alive. Her eyes opened, and she was greeted by the blindingly bright light of the hospital room. But this was not the divine light she had just experienced, it was the cold glow of medical lamps above her bed. Around her stood doctors and nurses, their expressions a mixture of relief and astonishment. One of the doctors, seeing that she was awake, exclaimed loudly, "She's back." The nurses rushed to check her vital signs, which, they said, had inexplicably begun improving. No one could believe that a person so close to death had suddenly regained consciousness and begun to stabilize. Kathy remained in a state of semi-silent shock. Her mind struggled to process what had happened. Her body felt frail, but that no longer mattered. She was here, in a world that now seemed both familiar and brand new. She remembered the light, the angels, the love that had filled her in that other realm, and the sense of purpose she had brought back with her. She couldn't yet explain all that she had seen, but one thing was certain: she hadn't been returned for no reason. Over the next few days, Kathy recovered slowly but steadily. The doctors called her recovery miraculous. They had expected the worst outcome, but instead, Kathy began breathing on her own. Her organs started functioning again, and her overall condition improved. However, for Kathy, physical healing was only part of the journey. It was far more challenging to comprehend what had happened to her on a spiritual level. She felt like someone who had been shown a great secret but hadn't yet been given the full understanding of its meaning. She shared her story with her loved ones, but not everyone could understand or believe what she described. She remembered the overwhelming love she had felt in the presence of the angels and how sharply it contrasted with the pain she had endured in hell. Her return to the world was not just a physical process. It was a rebirth, spiritual, emotional, and filled with a realization that her life would never be the same again. She knew she needed to find a way to tell her story so that it could become a bridge for others who feared death or doubted the existence of something greater. Later, Kathy would say that her return was not just a miracle but a reminder that life is a gift that should never be taken for granted. She felt she had been brought back to fulfill the mission she was given during her moment of healing in the light. There was something new in her eyes now, a calmness and confidence that hadn't been there before. She understood that her journey was far from over, but she had been given a second chance to live, to understand, and to share what she had seen. That was her new life, her new purpose. When Kathy returned to her ordinary life, she felt that her existence would never be the same again. The experience had transformed her to her core. Her body was still recovering from a long battle with illness, but finding harmony with what had occurred on a spiritual level proved even more challenging. Every day, she woke up with a sense of needing to understand why she had been given a second chance. The memories of her journey to hell, the angels, and the healing light remained vivid, but she felt they required interpretation. Questions plagued her. What exactly was she supposed to do? How could she use her experience to help others? At first, Kathy tried to return to her normal routine. But work, daily responsibilities, and casual social gatherings no longer brought her joy. Everything that had once seemed important now felt insignificant. Her spirit demanded more. She knew she had to share her experience, even if it would be difficult. She started small. Initially, she shared her story with close friends and family. Some listened with awe, others with skepticism. But for Kathy, that didn't matter. She knew her task was to simply tell the truth and leave the doubts to others. Soon, she discovered the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS. Joining this community became a turning point for her. There, she met people who had experienced similar events. With them, she could speak openly without fear of being misunderstood. She felt she had found a new family, people who shared her desire to comprehend and make sense of their experiences. The support and inspiration she received from IANDS encouraged her to take the next step. She decided to write a book about her experience. Her book, Misfit in Hell to Heaven Expat, became her way of sharing her story with the world. In it, she detailed her journey, from the trials of hell to the radiant light of heaven. Most importantly, she shared the lessons she had learned, the importance of living with love, forgiving oneself and others, and never losing faith. Writing proved to be more than just a way to share her story, it became an act of self-healing. Every word she wrote helped her better understand why her life had changed. But her mission didn't end there. Kathy began speaking at conferences, sharing her story with wider audiences, and inspiring people around the world. Her accounts brought comfort to those afraid of death, those grieving lost loved ones, and those simply searching for spiritual answers. Kathy often emphasized that her story was not just about her, it was about all of us. She believed her experiences were a reminder that hell and heaven are not merely places but states of the soul. She taught that we could create our own heaven or hell through our actions, thoughts, and attitudes toward life. Her mission wasn't just to share her experience but to inspire others to seek the light even in the darkest moments. She often said, "Love is always stronger than fear. Even when you feel lost, the light is always near. Just open your heart, and it will find you." Kathy felt her purpose was to remind people that their lives have meaning, that they are loved, and that there is always a path to healing. This mission became her new goal, her calling, and her way of giving back to the world what she had received in her moment of redemption through the light. Now, she looked at life with gratitude. Her days were dedicated to helping others, inspiring them, and reminding them that hope and love can overcome even the darkest forces. Her story continued to live on, becoming a source of light for thousands around the globe. If this story inspired you, please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Share your thoughts in the comments, they mean a lot to us. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.